On Christmas Eve last year, right in the middle of dinner, my son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Dad, we sold your house. You don't have a place to go back to anymore." I hadn't even taken a breath when my daughter-in-law, draped in a shimmering silver dress, tilted her head and smiled like a shard of broken glass. "Homeless suits you just fine." 10 minutes later, I walked out of their house into the cold December rain, not knowing that the money from the sale, $875,000, had been wired into a shell company, and that the video of them humiliating me would reach 3 million views in 72 hours. My name is Edward Hayes, widower, retired real estate appraiser, a man who spent 40 years building a home with his own hands, only to have it sold behind his back, sold to pay off the debts of a woman who never once called me Dad. If you're listening to this story, maybe lying in bed, driving through the night, or just trying to find a moment of peace after a long day, I want you to know something before I continue. What you're about to hear will change the way you look at Christmas forever. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about fake emails, forged signatures, a notary who had been dead for years, an $875,000 transfer into a ghost LLC, and a video that showed the whole country a son calling his own father homeless. If this story touches something inside you, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because trust me, you'll want to see how this Christmas debt gets paid back dollar by dollar, word by word, tear by tear. Christmas Eve 2024. Tacoma was drowning in rain. The lights hanging along the street bent in the wind, their warm yellow glow flickering like the last breath of a dying candle. I stood in front of Daniel's house holding a small gift box. Inside was a pair of wool socks I knitted myself, something Margaret used to make every year for the two of us. I thought, foolishly, that Daniel would understand the gesture, that he might smile the way he did when he was little. But when the door opened, I realized how wrong I was. Daniel looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face. Cold, preoccupied, and empty. No trace of the boy who used to hide behind my legs when thunder cracked. No shadow of the child who once hugged me tight when his mother scolded him by mistake. "Come in, Dad," he said with a thin smile, thin like the first layer of frost on a windshield. I stepped inside, and the moment the door closed behind me, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The dining table gleamed with silverware, candles, and Christmas decor. Everything perfect. Except my seat. My chair, the chair where I had sat for 40 Christmases, had been moved. All the way to the corner, right beside the trash bin. Not an accident, not a coincidence. I stared at it for a few seconds. It used to be the head of the table, the chair of the homeowner. Now it sat in the shadows like something unwanted. I sat down slowly, trying to keep my face calm, even as something inside my chest tightened like a fist. The air in the room was heavy. Daniel checked his phone more than he looked at me. Miley laughed too loudly with her friends. The sound of knives tapping plates rang sharp and metallic like metal scratching glass. Not one person asked Dad, "How have you been?" Not one asked if the rented room I lived in was warm enough in winter. No one spoke Margaret's name, the woman who poured her whole heart into our home. I sat there like an old ornament they didn't know where to place. Then Daniel lifted his glass. The candlelight flickered across his face, a face that had already made its decision. I thought he would offer a Christmas toast, maybe say something for his mother. Instead, his voice dropped a degree colder than the wind outside. "Dad, we sold the house. We had to pay Miley's loans." My world stopped. I couldn't swallow the bite of food in my mouth. That house was my life. 40 years of memory. Margaret's final breath. And he sold it. Without asking. Without telling me. Miley walked over. Her silver dress shimmered, her perfume expensive and sharp like a needle to the skin. She placed her hand on Daniel's shoulder and looked at me the way people look at a tired stranger on the street. You don't live there anymore. At your age? She shrugged, smiling a smile with edges. Homeless suits you. Not one person objected. Not one person said stop. Not one person stood up for me. Their silence was colder than Tacoma's winter night. When I stood up trying not to spill my wine because my hands were shaking, a small hand pulled at my coat. Grandpa, you can sit next to me. Emma, my 8-year-old granddaughter, placed a tiny Christmas candy in my hand. Her eyes were so sad that I looked away so I wouldn't break down in front of her. A child understood my pain. The adults sold my memories to pay off debts. I opened the door and stepped into the rain. No one stopped me. No one apologized. No one asked if I was okay. The door shut behind me, a small click, but loud enough to close 40 years of family I once believed in. I walked. Alone. On Christmas Eve. Like a man who had become, just as Miley said, homeless. What I didn't know was this. Someone in that house had recorded the whole thing. And that video, just hours later, would become the match that set this entire story on fire. If you want to know where a betrayal truly begins, don't look at the moment the knife finally goes in. Look at when they start sharpening it. Summer 2024 was when that blade first touched the stone, slow, quiet, patient. And I, foolishly, didn't notice a thing. That day was so hot the shingles on Daniel's roof looked like they were melting. The late July sun beat down on Tacoma and the heat rose off the pavement in trembling waves. Daniel had invited me to a family dinner. A rare invitation. I accepted immediately, partly because I missed my granddaughter and partly because, somewhere deep inside, I wanted to believe my son still had a little room for me in his life. Inside, the ceiling fan spun slowly, wobbling with every rotation, making small, tired, clicking sounds. Daniel stood by the grill, flipping meat with one hand, checking his phone with the other. Miley wore a short summer dress, holding a glass of white wine, and every time she walked past me, her perfume left a sharp, expensive trail behind her, the kind of scent worn by someone who lived in luxury she didn't earn. Emma ran to hug me as she always did. At least one person in that house was genuinely happy to see me. We all sat down. Daniel poured wine. Miley poured more for herself than for me. Then, just as I cut into the first piece of steak, Daniel asked in a casual voice that carried something rotten underneath, Dad, your house is worth what now? 1.3, 1.4 million. I froze. Not because he cared about the price, but because he asked the way a man asks when he desperately needs money. I put my knife down and answered slowly, each word firm. Your mother told me to never sell that house. That sentence was not just a rule, it was my promise to Margaret on her deathbed. Daniel nodded like he understood, but Miley's eyes told another story. She glanced at Daniel, quick, sharp, intentional. It was the kind of look two people share when they both agree. It's time. Right then. A small part of me sensed something was wrong, but I ignored it. I told myself it was just a harmless question. I was wrong. Some truths only reveal themselves after everything has already burned down. Months later, January 2025, when my lawyer Tom Berger opened county office files, I learned Daniel had gone to the hospital in 2023 when I was admitted for chest pains and tried to transfer the house into his name. He signed the forms on my behalf. The county rejected the request because the signature did not match and lacked my personal confirmation, meaning his first attempt to steal the house had already failed, and that summer dinner was simply the second attempt. I didn't know any of this back then, but when I look back now at Daniel's eyes that day, eyes that measured, calculated, evaluated, I understand he'd been planning long before Christmas. Hints in the conversation, I just didn't see them. During dinner, Miley casually mentioned Daniel's old student loans and how their finances were a little tight. Daniel added, "We're trying to refinance a few things." I asked, "Refinance what?" He looked away. "Oh, just a few things. Nothing important, but it was important. Very important." I later learned Daniel was in $300,000 of online gambling debt. Miley had 6 figures of credit card debt, and my home 40 years of my life was the last card they were planning to use. But that summer evening, I simply thought my son was stressed about work. Because that's what parents do when a child looks down, we automatically assume they are hiding sadness. Not a scheme. After dinner, when I got up to help clear the table, I noticed Daniel's home office door slightly ajar. I pushed it gently, meaning only to close it. But inside, I saw something that made my whole body go cold. Miley was holding Margaret's journal. On the floor were torn pages, ripped out, shredded, scattered like dead leaves. Among those pages was the entry Margaret wrote long ago. "If one day I'm gone, Ed must keep the house at any cost." Miley jolted when she saw me. She kicked the ripped pages into the trash and forced a smile. "Oh, just cleaning up. Old books, you know." But her eyes told me she knew exactly what she had destroyed. A piece of Margaret, a piece of her love, a piece of the house she wanted erased from my life. Daniel stood behind me in silence. He didn't stop her. When we stepped outside to take family photos, I saw Daniel and Miley talking quietly. Their heads leaned close. Their mouths moved fast. Then, just for a brief second, they looked at me. 1 second. But in that 1 second, I saw calculation, anticipation, and agreement. That was the look of two people who had already made a decision they didn't want me to know. A decision involving me and my home. When I left their house that night, Emma hugged me tight. Daniel waved without looking at me. Miley didn't bother to say goodbye. I remember telling myself, it's just one dinner. Don't overthink it. But if I had known then that Daniel had already tried to steal the house once, that Miley had torn Margaret's journal to erase her words that they had been whispering about money for months, I would have seen that summer dinner for what it was, the beginning of the betrayal, the sharpening of the knife. And as life has taught me, the deadliest wounds always come from the one you trust the most. There are days that pass like a breeze, and then there are days so heavy you feel 10 years older in a matter of minutes. October 10th, 2024 was the second kind. A Seattle rainstorm, the smell of disinfectant, the cold white light of a clinic, and one email that wiped out 40 years of my life. The cold of the hospital and a silence sharper than rain. Seattle Heart Institute is always busy in the mornings, yet strangely quiet. Rubber shoes squeak on polished floors. Monitors beep softly. Doctors whisper in distant hallways. I sat on a pale blue padded chair, the kind that always reminded me of the ER rooms where I once watched Margaret struggle for breath during her last hours. I never got used to the smell of hospitals. It reminds you of how fragile, how achingly lonely a human life can be. A young nurse with a kind smile told me the doctor would see me in a few minutes. I reached for my wallet to check my prescriptions, but then my phone buzzed. A single vibration. One email notification. I remember the moment with painful clarity. I didn't know that when my finger swiped down to open that email, my life would split into two halves, before 10/10/2024, and after 10/10/2024. One email, and my heartbeat stuttered. Sender, Unity Real Estate Escrow. I frowned. I wasn't buying anything. I wasn't selling anything. I wasn't using escrow. I opened it. Inside was a single cold line, as emotionless as a judge reading a sentence. Deposit confirmed, $875,000. I thought I misread it. I read it again, and again, and again. No, it was real. I opened the attached settlement file, my hand starting to tremble. A full closing statement. All signatures present. And under seller, my name, Edward Hayes. I felt the air being ripped out of the tiny exam room. I jumped to my feet, the chair screeching across the floor. My heart pounded so hard the monitor on the wall blinked red. "What is happening?" I whispered. I stared at the signature. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. I knew instantly. 40 years as a real estate appraiser, I'd studied thousands of signatures. I knew my own handwriting like I knew my own heartbeat. But this one was wrong. Subtly wrong. The final curve on the Y tilted the wrong direction. The H was drawn with a different pressure, a different hand. The downward stroke of the S was too long a tremor in the forger's wrist. Someone, a stranger, had tried to imitate my writing, but not well enough. The pain that hit me wasn't medical. It was betrayal, cold, sharp slicing from the inside. The call to Daniel, and the gentlest cruelty I've ever heard, I called my son. He picked up before the third ring. Cheerful, Dad. Where are you? At the hospital. Daniel, what did you sell? I don't understand this email. A tiny pause, and then a light laugh as if he'd just told me a surprise birthday gift. Oh, you saw it already. Well, surprise. My blood ran cold. What did you do? The house. We sold it. We needed to pay off Miley's loans. His tone was soft casual, like he was talking about returning something at Costco. That's whoa. My home, Daniel. You don't live there anymore, Dad. You're old. You don't need as much as we do. You should be grateful we took care of the debt. Grateful. I should be grateful that my son sold my house and decided I no longer needed it. I never signed anything I said. How did they sell it without me? Daniel chuckled. You did sign, Dad. You just forgot. My knees nearly gave out. No, I whispered. I did not sign anything. There's a recording, he said. A recording. My stomach nodded. I scrolled down the email. There it was. An audio file. 10 seconds long. I pressed play. And I heard my voice. I approve selling the house. Except, I knew instantly it wasn't real. It was cut, stitched, and spliced. The background noise changed halfway through. The breath patterns didn't match. The tone was wrong. And then it hit me. Weeks earlier, in a tired moment, I'd said to Daniel, do what you think is best. A harmless sentence. A weary father's sigh. Not a legal authorization. Miley had recorded it secretly, and she had cut that phrase into the sentence that stripped me of my home. They used my name, my voice, my words, my memories, even Margaret's dying wish to push me out of my own life. The clinic went silent and the rain became a noose. The doctor walked in, but his voice was muffled, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. Mr. Hayes, your blood pressure is a bit high. I didn't hear the rest. My eyes were fixed on the rain sliding down the window. Drop after drop, cold, steady, ruthless. The world outside kept moving. People shopping. People laughing. Car engines humming. Someone sipping coffee. Someone holding hands. Nobody knew that a 70-year-old man stood in that exam room discovering that the house he lived in his entire adult life had vanished as if it never existed. Nobody knew his heart was cracking quietly and completely. I placed my hand against the cold glass. My breath fogged it for a moment before fading away. And I whispered, they tricked me. Not strangers. Not thieves. Not some scammer from across the world. But my own son. The boy I once carried on my shoulders. The child who once hid inside my coat in the rain. The one whose tiny hand once wrapped around my finger when he was scared. He used my name, my signature, my voice, my memories, and his mother's last wish to cut me out of everything I had. I didn't just lose my house. I lost the trust I had spent a lifetime building. I looked down at my shaking hands. My breath came uneven. I thought of Margaret, her journal, her last words to me, Ed. Keep our home, no matter what. I had promised her, sworn it. And I, blind naive, had let my own son betray that promise. The rain outside intensified, running down the window in long, heavy streaks, blurring my reflection. An old man standing alone with nothing left but pain and the raw truth. From the moment I opened that email, I no longer had a home. I had been stripped of everything, not just property, but dignity. But Daniel didn't know one thing. From that moment on, I wasn't afraid of losing anything anymore. I was afraid of something else. That if I didn't stand up and fight, the old man reflected in that glass would die in silence. There are friends who don't show up for the celebrations, the birthdays, the barbecues, the good days. But when your life is seconds away from collapsing, they appear at the door like a lifeline. For me, that person was Tom Berger. Tom is 48 now, an attorney who specializes in elder financial exploitation. The crimes that target people my age. The quiet kind of cruelty that happens behind closed doors. We met decades ago, back when we were both broke. I was still driving an old Ford with a cracked windshield, and Tom lived in his sister's basement while studying law. When I called him, when he heard the tremor in my voice, his tone dropped instantly. "Ed, bring me everything. Don't sign anything else. And do not call Daniel again." I drove to his office under a steady Tacoma drizzle. The kind of rain that feels like your own face, heavy, cold, and unwilling to stop. Tom's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building. The smell of roasted coffee and dry paper filled the hallway. His walls were lined with degrees and certifications, but none of it mattered as much as the look he gave me when I placed the stack of documents in front of him. Not pity, not anger. Just a look that said, the truth is about to hurt. He slipped on his glasses and opened the first page. The room was so quiet I could hear the soft tap of his pen on the desk. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then Tom set the pen down. "Ed, sit down. This is worse than you think." The first crack, my own name spelled wrong. He lifted one page and tapped the bottom corner. "Look at this," he said softly. "They even spelled your name wrong. Hayes, not Hayes." My chest tightened. Someone trying to forge my signature didn't even know how to spell my name. A small mistake, but one that cut through me like ice. Tom leaned back. "Whoever did this didn't know your handwriting. This is low-level forgery. But dangerous, because they assumed you would never see it." The second crack, the notary who died in 2021. Tom turned to another page. A round notary seal, slightly smudged ink. The name, Cynthia L. Moore. He typed the name into Washington's notary database. Waited 5 seconds, then raised an eyebrow. "Ed, this notary died in 2021. My spine went numb. "What?" Dead, Tom repeated. "They used the seal of a woman who hasn't been alive for 3 years to legalize the sale of your home." My hands curled into fists. "Daniel, my son used a dead woman's notary seal to steal my house." Tom's voice dropped lower. "This isn't carelessness, Ed. This is criminal." The third crack, the fake escrow at a nail salon. He opened his laptop and looked up the escrow address listed in the contract. Unity Holdings, LLC, 1142 South Pine Street, Tacoma. He turned the screen toward me. I stared at it. It was a shuttered nail salon, empty since 2018, paper covering the windows, half the sign fallen off. Tom exhaled sharply. They used an abandoned nail salon as their escrow office. Meaning? He paused. The escrow doesn't exist. I felt something inside me sink deeper than fear, deeper than anger, a kind of loss that steals the strength from your bones. The fourth crack, Daniel tried to steal the house once. Before Tom opened another file, the county property records. He slid it across the desk. December 7th, 2023. Transfer request. Pending review. Tom looked at me. "You were in the hospital that month, weren't you?" "Chest pains." I nodded slowly. "While you were in a hospital bed, your son went to the county office to transfer the house into his name." My stomach dropped. "And the signature," I whispered. "Fake," Tom answered. and the county rejected it because it looked suspicious. So Daniel tried once, failed, tried again 6 months later, then one more time and succeeded. I wasn't shaking from anger. I was shaking from heartbreak. Tom spoke gently, not as a lawyer, but as a friend watching someone's soul crack. Ed, your son didn't do this in desperation. This wasn't a moment of panic. He paused. This was a plan. I closed my eyes. Daniel, why would you do this to your father? I murmured. But deep down, I already knew the answer. For some people, money doesn't just buy comfort. It buys betrayal. The full list. The crimes of my own son Tom took a blank sheet of paper and wrote down each charge, his pen hitting the desk like a hammer. 1. Escrow fraud, creating a fake LLC to receive the money. Forged signature. My name misspelled, lines trembling. Forged power of attorney, attached to the fake sale. 4. Notary fraud, using the seal of a dead woman. 5. Wire fraud, the $875,000 fake transaction. 6. Elder financial exploitation, targeting me because of my age. He looked up, eyes steady. Ed, this isn't civil anymore. This is a high-level criminal case. My breath caught in my chest. Then Tom placed a firm hand on my shoulder. Ed, you're not losing your home. His voice deepened. You didn't lose. You just won the first round. I stared at him confused. He held up the folder. With this evidence, the court won't just return your house. He paused. They'll put Daniel and Miley in prison. For a moment, the room fell completely silent. Even the sound of rain faded away. A father never wants to hear that about his own child. But after everything they'd done, I knew this wasn't a family matter anymore. It was justice. I gripped the file in my hands. I wasn't trembling anymore. For the first time in months, I felt something return to me. Something I thought had died the night Daniel called me homeless. Resolve. There are days when your life breaks because of something someone does to you. But there are nights. Nights when your life breaks because of a voice you thought you would never hear again. October 15th, 2024 was one of those nights. A night when the past didn't return to comfort me, but to shake something deep inside my bones and remind me that I was still alive, and still bound to a promise. I left Tom Berger's office at around 8 p.m. Tacoma was drizzling again, not a heavy rain but a slow, persistent one, like a sad melody nobody wants to hear, yet it keeps playing all night long. I drove slowly down 6th Avenue past bars full of warm laughter, past young people huddled together under umbrellas, past lovers holding hands on the sidewalk. They all had somewhere to go, someone waiting for them, a home. And me, I was driving back to the tiny rental room where I'd been staying like a man drifting through his own life. A man who once had everything and now had a room with peeling paint and windows that rattled when the wind blew. A man who worked his whole life to protect his family, only to become the only one in the family who wasn't protected. I parked in front of the cheap motel-like building, the yellow lights reflecting off the wet pavement. As I stepped out, the cold slapped my face, a quiet reminder. You're alone, Ed. The room was small enough that 3 steps could take you from one wall to the other. A creaking twin bed, a small electric stove I almost never used, a wobbly wooden table, a window that looked out onto a dark parking lot. I hung my wet coat over the chair and placed my phone on the table. And for the first time in months, I felt my knees weaken. Not because of the house, not because of Daniel, but because I missed Margaret so deeply it hurt to breathe. Her passing was a wound, but Daniel's betrayal was salt crushed into that wound. My eyes drifted toward the corner to the old wooden box Margaret left me. I hadn't opened it since I moved here. I was afraid. Afraid the memories inside would be too sharp and would break whatever was left of me. But tonight, I knew I had to. The box wasn't big. Old pine wood cracked at the corners. The color faded with time. Margaret kept our whole life in their wedding photos, handwritten letters, hospital forms, her journals. Little things she called pieces of memory. I knelt beside it, my knee popping loudly, and I wasn't sure if the sound came from age or grief. I placed my hand on the lid. It was cold, as if time had frozen inside it. I took a breath and opened it. A faint smell rose up, old paper mixed with lavender. Margaret's favorite scent. Right on top was a wrinkled folder, scanned copies of her will and her journal. I had thought the original journal pages were destroyed, torn apart by Miley. But Margaret, smart as she always was, had scanned every page before writing the final entry by hand. I opened the files on my phone. Her handwriting filled the screen. Ed must keep this home. No matter what happens, whether I am here or gone, this house is ours. Then the line that cracked me open: if I am gone someday, do not let anyone, not even Daniel, take our home. I sat there breathless. She knew. She saw what I chose not to see. Margaret saw Daniel changing, saw the danger in him, saw the hunger, the carelessness, the greed. Long before I did, I dug deeper into the box. A photo of Margaret holding newborn Daniel. A picture of us standing in front of the unfinished house in 1988. The silk scarf she wore the last Christmas Eve we spent together. A birthday card she wrote when I turned 55. Ed, you are my home. I clutched that card until my knuckles turned white. Home. Family. Everything about us began and ended in that house. And Daniel, my son, sold it behind my back. At the bottom of the box was Margaret's flip phone. She never wanted a new one. Said this one fit her hand. The screen was cracked, but somehow it still turned on. There was one unheard voicemail. One message I never had the courage to open. I pressed play. Her breathing was soft, shaky. The sound of a fading life. Then her voice filled the room, a voice I had tried so hard not to remember because remembering hurt too much. Ed. My hand covered my mouth. If one day I'm not here, promise me, don't let anyone take our home. A pause. Then the words that shattered me. Not Daniel, not Daniel. My knees hit the floor and I cried, not because I was weak, not because I was scared, but because the woman I loved most saw the truth long before I did. I sat there against the wall, the phone pressed to my chest, tears running down my neck. For months, through homelessness, through humiliation, through betrayal. I didn't cry. I was too numb to cry. But hearing Margaret's voice, I broke. I let myself break. I needed to break because what came next would require every ounce of strength I had. I wiped my face, sat upright, placed Margaret's phone gently on the table like a sacred promise. Then I opened her voicemail again. Listened to every word, every breath. Promise me. I closed my eyes and answered out loud as if she were standing right there with me. I promise. I will get our home back. I will get the truth back. I will get everything Daniel tried to bury. I opened my laptop. My hands still trembled, but my eyes were steady. I gathered every piece of evidence Tom had given me, the forged signature, Edward Hayes. The dead notary seal. Unity Holdings, LLC. Daniel's fake company. Miley's edited audio recording. The fake settlement statement. The escrow phishing email. The 2023 transfer request Daniel filed while I was in the hospital. The rejected county paperwork. I attached them all. Then opened the portal IRS Fraud Division Report, financial crime, and filled each field. Forgery, escrow fraud. Elder financial exploitation, identity theft. Wire fraud. $875,000. I reviewed it twice. Nothing missing. Then I hit send. A confirmation appeared. Your report has been received. A federal agent will review your case within 72 hours. I stared at the screen for a long, long time, and then I stood. for the first time since losing everything. I stood tall. I looked out the window. Rain still fell, cold, relentless, merciless. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I whispered, "Margaret, I will fight. I will win, and our home will return to the one it belongs to." That night in a tiny rented room, a 70-year-old man walked from grief into determination. And I knew it didn't matter who started this war. It mattered who finished it. And I, Edward Hayes, would be the one to finish it. Some battles begin with bullets. Mine began with an email from the IRS. October 28, 2024. The email that shifted everything. I was standing in line at a small Tacoma coffee shop when my phone buzzed. IRS Fraud Division. Case Review Update. Those few words made my fingers go numb. I opened the email. We confirmed the $875,000 transaction was not declared for tax purposes. The transfer shows signs of irregularity and federal violation. My heartbeat stalled. And below that, Unity Holdings LLC does not exist in state or federal tax systems. I froze in the middle of the crowded shop. The smell of hot espresso rose around me, yet I felt colder than the drafty little room I'd been living in. Unity Holdings. The company Daniel used to launder the money from the sale of my home had never filed a single tax document. No EIN, no tax registration, nothing. Which meant only one thing: Daniel wasn't just committing fraud. He was committing a federal crime. Crimes the FBI takes very seriously. I gripped my phone, breathing through the sting in my chest. Daniel, you've gone further than I ever imagined. Tacoma started raining again that day, that same cold, relentless rain that had followed me since the Christmas they threw me out. Tom's call. "Ed, this is only the surface." When I got back to the rooming house, the phone rang. Tom Berger. I answered. "Ed." Tom's voice was low, urgent, steady. "I just spoke with the IRS. And what they told you is only the tip of the iceberg." I sat on my metal frame bed. A spring squeaked. "Tom, tell me." He took a slow breath. "Ed, part of the $875,000 never touched any legitimate escrow account." My stomach tightened. "Where did it go?" Tom spoke the next words like a verdict. "Straight into Daniel's personal account. He sent me a PDF labeled Wire Transfer Trace, Unity Holdings LLC. I opened it. The first line, $125,000, Wind Cove Casino Online, VIP, account date 10/12/2024. I couldn't breathe. Daniel, my son, used the money from selling my home, Margaret's home, to pay off his gambling debt. I turned to the next page. $9,200, Chanel Boutique, Seattle, downtown, purchaser. Miley Turner. I closed my eyes. A Chanel bag, worth almost 2 months of my retirement checks. I could picture it, Miley smiling as she slid the bag onto her shoulder, Daniel beside her, proud he could provide for his wife with my house. The next page, $52,000, Arlington Therapy Center, Gambling Recovery Program. Daniel Turner. My hand dropped. He used my home to pay for the damage he had caused himself. He stole from me to fix himself, to wash his hands, to pretend he wasn't spiraling. And I truly believed I couldn't hurt more than I already had. I was wrong. November 12th. The flight to Mexico. Tom called again. "Ed, there's more. I'm sitting down." "Go ahead." Tacoma police coordinated with the bank handling Unity Holdings. I held my breath. "There's one transaction the IRS hasn't sent you yet." I waited. Tom read each word slowly. $40. Alaska Airlines. 2 first-class tickets to Cancun, Mexico. Departure date 12/02/2024. I closed my eyes. 2 tickets. First class. Booked in advance. Daniel and Miley. I exhaled sharply, not from shock, but from the realization they weren't just selling the house. They were planning to flee. Leave me behind. Leave their crimes behind. Leave the wreckage in my chest behind. They were going to walk away from it all in comfort and luxury, while I lived in a room with peeling paint. I said nothing for a long moment. Tom broke the silence. Ed, listen to me. I stared at the dark corner of the room. A con man isn't afraid of getting caught, Tom said. He's afraid of being exposed. He continued, Daniel thinks you're weak. He thinks you'll let this go. He thinks you don't have the strength to fight back. I swallowed. But he's forgotten something. Tom's voice dropped to a deep, steady tone. He's forgotten you still have Margaret behind you. My throat burned. Tom was right. I wasn't fighting alone. November 20th. The federal case begins. That morning, for the first time in months, I woke up feeling lighter. I made coffee. The steam rose into the cold late autumn air. Then my phone buzzed. IRS Fraud Division. Criminal case initiated. I opened the email. We have officially opened a federal investigation into Unity Holdings, LLC, and into Daniel Turner. My heartbeat slowed, but grew stronger. Below a list of potential charges: wire fraud, forgery, notary; fraud, elder, financial exploitation, tax evasion; identity theft; escrow fraud; money laundering. I read it once, then twice. The last line stood alone. Case escalated to Federal Criminal Unit. I turned toward the window. Tacoma's sky was gray, but for the first time in a long time I felt light breaking somewhere inside me. I called Tom. Tom. He was planning to leave for Mexico. I heard Tom inhale sharply. I know. The police know. And the good news is, what a criminal who attempts to flee the country, he paused, is sentenced 3 times as hard. I didn't speak. Not because I was grateful, not because I felt victorious, but because I understood something clearly for the first time. Daniel didn't sell the house because he simply needed money. He sold it because he wanted to escape responsibility. He wanted a new life in Mexico with Miley. A clean slate. A life built on the ashes of mine. And he believed I wouldn't be strong enough to stop him. But this time, for the first time in many years, he miscalculated. Rain tapped softly against the window. The reflection of headlights streaked across the glass. I placed my hand on the cold pane and whispered, slow, steady, deadly calm, Daniel, you sold that house to run, but I will use that very choice to bring you into the light. Because after the IRS accepted the case, this stopped being a father fighting his son. It became a victim fighting a criminal. And I would not lose. There are confrontations that erupt with shouting, slam tables, and chaos. And then there are the other kind, the kind that need only one look, one sentence for an entire lifetime of lies to collapse. For me, the confrontation at Blue Fern Bistro was exactly that. December 15th, 2024, Tacoma, Washington. I arrived at Daniel's restaurant at 7:15 p.m. Tacoma's air was cold, wet, heavy, the kind of cold that turns your breath white after mere seconds. The Blue Fern Bistro sign flickered in the wind, its neon sputtering like a dying fish just below the surface. I stood outside for a moment, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to look at the place Daniel had bragged about for years. My success, my achievement. My life beyond my father's shadow. Tonight, it was empty. Inside 17 tables. Only one was occupied, mine. 2 employees stood stiff behind the counter, avoiding my gaze. One was tearing up stacks of canceled reservations. The other was pulling down blinds as if to hide the restaurant's collapse. Why was it empty? I knew exactly why. Hundreds of 1-star reviews had flooded Yelp in the past 2 weeks. Owner kicked his elderly father out of his home. Elder abuse. Homeless father scandal. Tacoma does not forgive men who betray their own blood. Daniel hadn't only lost a restaurant. He lost his reputation, his friends, his customers, his standing, and now the only thing left for him to salvage was himself. Daniel walks out and fear is the first thing I see. The kitchen door swung open. White fluorescent light spilled over Daniel's face. He looked worse than I expected. Dark circles sunk deep under his eyes. Cheeks hollowed, shirt wrinkled, sleeves rolled unevenly. His hands trembling. Dad. The word barely left his lips, so soft that if there had been music playing, I might not have heard it. He pulled out the chair across from me, and between us a scratched wooden table just wide enough for a battle neither of us wanted, yet both of us had been walking toward for months. Daniel swallowed. Thank you for coming. His voice cracked like thin glass. I said nothing, just watched him. The look on his face told me one truth. He knew I knew everything. He braced his elbows on the table and exhaled shakily. Dad, you know right. You understand, don't you? You're older now. I just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. A dry laugh escaped me. No warmth, no mercy. My voice dropped low, steady, cold. You called your father homeless. To take care of him. Daniel's fingers knotted together. Dad, I didn't mean it like that. I was under pressure. The restaurant was failing, debts were piling up. I cut him off. So you sold my house. The house your mother made me promise to protect at all costs. His head lowered. He couldn't meet my eyes. For the first time, he didn't sit across from me as my son. He sat as a man cornered by his own sins. Miley enters and pours gasoline on the fire. The bathroom door opened. Heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor. Miley walked out like she owned the place. Silver satin dress, Tom Ford perfume, red lipstick, perfect curls. But her face froze the moment she saw me. She crossed her arms. I know you're going to blame Daniel, but you have to understand. We did what we did. For you. I raised an eyebrow. For me, you spent $9,200 on a Chanel bag using the money from the sale of my house for me. Miley's face drained of color. Daniel whispered sharply. Miley! I told you not to. She snapped back. I didn't know he found all that. I leaned back, silent. Silence worked better than yelling. Silence made them unravel. Daniel grabbed Miley's arm and pulled her into her seat. Enough, Miley. Then he turned to me. Dad, I know I was wrong, but I'm trying to fix it. I asked you here because I want our family. Again, I cut him off. Family. When you looked me in the eye and called me homeless, was that family to you? Daniel pressed his palms to his forehead, breathing hard. He had no way out. I reached into my coat pocket and placed a white envelope between us. Daniel stared at it like it was a blade pressed to his throat. What? What is that? He already knew. I answered the truth. And the proof. His hands trembled as he pulled it toward him. He opened it slowly like he feared it might explode. Inside bank statements for the $875,000, the forged Edward Hayes signature, the dead notary's seal, the abandoned nail salon escrow address, the Mexico first-class tickets, the Chanel receipt, the gambling recovery payments, the fake escrow email, case law on elder exploitation. Every page a verdict. I spoke calmly. Tom is working with the IRS. Police are monitoring your accounts. And the FBI will open their case this week. Daniel shot to his feet, his chair smashed into the wall. What do you want from me? His voice broke apart, yelling but trembling. I replied softly but with weight heavy enough to crush stone. The truth. Daniel tries to destroy evidence, but the camera sees everything. Daniel's eyes darted around the room, to the envelope, to Miley, to the terrified employees in the corner. Then he did the stupidest thing he could have done. He reached out and tried to swipe the envelope off the table. Instinct, panic, desperation. But it was the act that destroyed him. The papers scattered across the floor like snow. Daniel dropped to his knees, scrambling to pick them up. And in that exact moment, I lifted my finger, pointed upward, to the ceiling, where a small red light blinked a security camera. Recording. Every second. Daniel froze. I said clearly, "You just attempted to destroy evidence. On your restaurant's security camera." Miley gasped. The employees stared wide-eyed. Daniel staggered back to his feet, face white as ash. "Dad, please," I stood. Slowly. I picked up each paper from the floor, calm, unhurried, slid them back into the envelope, closed it neatly. Then I looked him in the eyes, the same eyes that once made me proud. And I said in a voice carved from the darkest months of my life, "Daniel, you didn't just sell a house, you sold your own honor." I turned and walked toward the door. The Blue Fern's glass door opened. Cold night air slapped my face, but I felt lighter. Behind me I heard a chair fall over, Daniel collapse onto it. Miley choked back a sob. But I didn't turn around. I no longer had a reason to. December 18th, 2024. Tacoma, Washington. There are pains that don't come from a punch, not from harsh words, but from the price someone else puts on the things you loved most. For me, that pain arrived on the gray, cold afternoon of December 18th, 2024. The first time I returned to my old home since the day Daniel called me homeless. I stopped the car 100 feet away, not out of fear, but to breathe 1743 Maplewood Drive. The house I built. The house I repaired hinge by hinge. The house whose snow I shoveled for over a dozen winters. It stood there like an old friend who had been left to die slowly. The lawn I once trimmed to perfection was now torn apart. Margaret's lavender bed, the one she tended with such patience, had been ripped out completely. The garage door hung open. Inside were piles of boxes. But none of that stopped me in my tracks. What was Margaret's rocking chair. Thrown out into the yard, face up to the cold winter rain, mold creeping along the armrest, cushion torn, wood swollen and green. A piece of her treated like trash. My chest tightened as if someone clenched it with both hands. Margaret sat in that chair every night. She knit there, read there, rocked Daniel to sleep when he was a baby. Now it lay in the yard, discarded. I walked slowly to it, placed my hand on the arm. The wood was cold as stone, yet to me it would always feel warm, still carrying the faint memory of pine oil she used to wipe it down with every morning. The HOA president sends me a message and my world fractures. I leaned on the porch rail, opened my phone. A message from the HOA president Gallagher. A link. Facebook Marketplace. I tapped it. Wedding frame, $40. Pickup in Tacoma. The photo froze my breath. It was our wedding picture. Me in a black tuxedo. Margaret in her square-neck white dress, cheeks flushed, smiling nervously. Now, our picture was on Facebook Marketplace like a second-hand item. $40, not even the cost of a modest dinner. I swallowed hard. It tasted metallic. Not spit. Humiliation. I scrolled down. Another listing, vintage rug. Handmade. $25. Pickup only. And when I saw the picture, my knees nearly buckled. Margaret's rug. The one she embroidered during the winter of 1991. 6 months of stitching. Every thread placed by hand as she sat by the window while snow fell outside. Daniel played with Lego bricks on that rug. Napped on it. Now it was being sold for $25. Below the listing, still available. Can drop price. Can I pick up today? I wanted to scream. To smash the phone. To storm into the house and take everything back. But I didn't move. My hands hung worthless at my sides. My chest boiled like a pot left too long on the stove. Then Gallagher calls and shows me the video. 4:10 p.m. Gallagher called. "Ed, you need to see this." We met by my car. He opened his laptop and played a CCTV clip from the neighborhood camera. Date December 14th, time 2:37 a.m. There he was. Daniel, walking out the back door of my home. Cold night air. Hoodie. Hat pulled low. Dragging 2 large 50-gallon black trash bags. I recognized them. I used the same type back in 2018 when I cleaned the basement. But what shattered me was how heavy those bags were. He dragged them across the driveway like they were filled with bricks. He paused at the communal dumpster. 2 seconds, then threw them in. The sound a dead hollow thud against metal, like something hitting a coffin. Gallagher exhaled. We opened one of the bags before sanitation picked them up. My throat tightened. What was inside? My voice trembled. He looked at me for a moment, then said Margaret's photos, and her embroidery. I closed my eyes. My heart didn't hurt this time. It simply collapsed inward, leaving an empty crater behind. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't curse Daniel's name. I just stood there silent. So silent it felt like the sky itself might fall on me. I returned to my car, and the darkness fills everything. Rain began to fall lightly. Moisture crept into the car through the cracked window. The interior was so dim I could barely see my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I couldn't drive, couldn't breathe. I unlocked my phone, opened the voicemail from Margaret's old flip phone, the voicemail I had promised myself I would never listen to again. But tonight, I needed it to stay alive. Her voice played thin and shaky, but clearer than anything in my world. Ed, promise me. My eyes burned. Don't let anyone take our home. My grip tightened. Not Daniel. I opened my eyes. And for the first time since being humiliated, betrayed, and thrown out of my own home, the hollow space in my chest filled with something new. Not anger. Not grief. Fire. Not the kind that destroys, the kind that purifies. The kind lit by obligation. By love. By a vow. To her. And to myself. I wiped my face, put the car in ignition, and said aloud slowly, like speaking an oath, Margaret, I will get everything back. For you. For our home. And for me. I pulled away from Maplewood Drive without looking back, because from the moment Margaret's voice rose in that dark car, I was no longer the father who had been called homeless. I was the man returning to reclaim justice, inches at a time, memory by memory, sin by sin. And none of Daniel's sins would escape me. Some battles you fight alone. But there are battles where you simply stand still and the truth fights for you. Mine belonged to the second kind. Daniel lit the fuse himself. He just didn't know the explosion would turn the entire state against him. December 26th, 2024. The video drops. Washington State explodes. The morning after Christmas, I was making coffee in my tiny rented room when my phone began buzzing nonstop. Messages, missed calls, notifications stacking up like a storm. I thought something terrible had happened. But when I checked, I saw the name of the first person who posted it. Mrs. Walker, age 66, my neighbor for 20 years. Her caption, I can't stay silent anymore. This is the truth. The video was 34 seconds long. It showed Daniel standing in the middle of the Christmas dinner table, face cold as granite, voice sharp as ice. Dad, we sold the house. You don't live there anymore. You're basically homeless. You could hear Miley snicker, the scrape of metal forks on porcelain, my breath catching in my throat. And the moment my 8-year-old granddaughter placed a peppermint in my hand. The video ended with me walking out into the rain. No music, no filter, just the naked truth. 3 hours, 128,000 views. 24 hours, 1.2 million. 72 hours, 3.1 million. Hashtags everywhere. Homeless, father #Daniel Turner case. #elder, abuse. Washington State caught fire. December 28th, Fox 13. Seattle calls me Mr. Hayes, we'd like to interview you. I refused. I didn't want to shame my own son on television. But they said, it's not to humiliate Daniel. It's to raise awareness about elder exploitation. And to show people like you that they're not alone. So I agreed. That night the broadcast opened with, a Tacoma man was called homeless by his own son, after the son illegally sold the family home. Then King 5 covered it. Then Kiaro 7. Then Como News. Everybody in Washington knew the name Daniel Turner. December 29th. A phone call that changes everything. I was eating soup when Tom called. Ed, you're not going to believe this. I heard him chuckle, quiet, disbelieving. Samuel Arden wants to meet you. I nearly dropped the bowl. Samuel Arden, top 3 attorney in Seattle. The man who beat the largest insurance corporation in the state. His rate was never under $500 an hour. Why would he want to meet me? Tom answered. He saw the video. And he is furious. He wants to help you. Free of charge, pro bono, everything. I sat there in silence, not sure whether to feel grateful or sad that the truth had to be this awful for someone like him to step in. But one thing was certain, I was no longer alone. January 2nd, 2025. The HOA special meeting. I wasn't planning to attend, but Gallagher called. Ed, you should be here. This is important. I went. Over 40 people filled the room. Neighbors, homeowners, residents. Gallagher stood at the front. We are reviewing Resolution Number 21 to ban Daniel Turner from Maplewood community for 3 years. Reasons: destruction of community property, caught on HOA cameras, security risk, severe fraudulent behavior. They voted. Hands rose one by one. 39 votes. Yes. 1 no, 2 abstained. The no was an elderly man who didn't know who Daniel was. I stood at the back of the room, heart heavy but steady. This wasn't victory. It was justice catching up. January 4th, the knock on my door. I was tidying my small room when I heard a truck outside. I stepped out. 15 people stood in front of my door, the Mexican-American families from Block 12. 2 Native American grandmothers, the church volunteer youths, Gallagher and his wife, 3 construction workers from the neighborhood. They carried hammers, aluminum ladders, fresh lumber roofing sheets, insulation packs, toolboxes, and an envelope. I opened it. Inside, handwritten, "We're going to fix your roof. No charge. No labor fee." This is simply the right thing to do. My throat tightened. I couldn't breathe for a moment. That afternoon, light rain fell over Tacoma, but on my roof the sound of steady hammering echoed gently, like a heartbeat returning to a tired chest. One of the grandmothers handed me hot cocoa. "You're not alone, Ed. We know the kind of man you are." I held the cup with shaking hands, and for the first time in months, I felt like I still belonged somewhere. January 5th. Daniel becomes Washington's most hated son. King 5 posted an article, "The Most Hated Son in Washington," with Daniel's face from the viral clip. Reddit exploded. Oh, Washington, 12,000 comments. Our public freakout. Top 3 trending are Justice. Served 20,000 upvotes. Twitter flooded with #justice for Edward, not my son, elder abuse, Daniel Turner. People wrote, "If there's a Worst Son of the Year award, Daniel wins. Kicking your elderly father out to pay for Chanel's sick." Miley wasn't spared either. Chanel wife became the number 4 trending meme in the entire state. I didn't enjoy seeing any of that. Daniel is my son, betrayal or not. But I couldn't deny one truth. The world had seen what really happened, and Washington State had chosen my side. That night, in the quiet of my small room, I sat on the old wooden chair watching the streetlights glow through the window. No music, no noise, just me and the truth. I whispered not a prayer but a confirmation, "Margaret, people are standing with us now." I closed my eyes. The legal battle was still ahead, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The wind in Washington had shifted, and the next storm would fall on Daniel. Some truths are like bloodstains. You can scrub them, hide them, wipe them clean, but under the right light they always come back. And in Daniel's case, that light had 3 names: Tom Berger, the IRS, and the Tacoma Police Department. January 8th, 2025. "Mr. Hayes, please have a seat." Tom asked me to come to his office. I thought it would just be him and me. But when the door swung open, I saw 2 IRS criminal investigations agents, 1 Tacoma police detective, and a man in a black suit with a badge reading Financial Crimes Unit. The room was silent. Only the ceiling fan hummed softly overhead. Tom motioned for me to sit. An IRS agent spoke first. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming. We need to confirm a few things about the $875,000 transaction." I nodded. He opened his laptop and turned the screen toward me. A web of red, blue, and yellow lines filled the screen, a spiderweb of transactions. Each red dot was a crime waiting to be named. Evidence 1. The $875,000 never touched a real escrow account. The agent pointed at the first chart. "This is the legitimate escrow account for Pierce County." He tapped the screen. "It never received a single cent from the sale of your home." Then he switched to another graph. "The money went directly to Unity Holdings LLC, a company owned solely by Daniel Turner." My fingers tightened on the armrests. The laptop chimed as the agent closed the tab. Evidence 2. Unity Holdings, a shell company built for theft. Tom slid a packet across the table. Inside, no EIN, no tax filings, no business license, no physical office, no employees. Tom said, "Unity Holdings has one purpose: to vacuum your $875,000. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Evidence 3. Crypto, where Daniel thought the trail ended. The Tacoma detective clicked to the next slide. A map of crypto transactions filled the screen. He said Daniel transferred the $875,000 to Unity Holdings, then split it into 117 separate crypto transactions. The IRS agent smirked. He thought crypto would erase the trail. But the blockchain doesn't forget. Line by line, the screen listed $125,000. Wind Cove Casino online. VIP account, $52,000. Arlington Therapy Center, Gambling Recovery Program, $9,200. Chanel, Seattle, downtown, $7,840. Alaska Airlines 2. First class tickets to Mexico, $4,500. Apple Store, $18,900. Private gambling room, Bellevue, $800. Fast cash, crypto to cash ATM. Each line felt like a knife to the chest, but I didn't shake anymore. I asked only one question. How much of the money has been recovered? About 78% is frozen. Mr. Hayes, your son will never touch it again. Evidence 4. Google history. The dumbest evidence. And the strongest. The detective handed me a folder. We pulled Daniel's Google search history from his phone and laptop. I opened it. My stomach sank not from pain, but from clarity. Search terms included how to fake POA signature Washington State notary loopholes, how much prison for elder exploitation flight to Mexico, no extradition. Can you get arrested for selling parents' house? How to delete crypto wallet history. I closed my eyes, not in grief, but in confirmation. Daniel didn't act in panic. He planned every step, every lie, every signature, every search. Evidence 5. Blue Fern Bistro. The collapse. Another agent read off a sheet. January 18, 2025. Surprise health inspection. Violations. 17 major infractions. Improper food storage. Unsanitary kitchen. Gas line leak. Employees lacking safety certifications. Fine, $14,700. Order, temporary closure. Tom looked at me. Ed. That's when Daniel truly started spiraling. He didn't sell your house to save the restaurant, he sold it to save his lifestyle. March 3, 2025, final meeting, the case is complete. I sat in a conference room with Tom, the 2 IRS agents, the Tacoma detective and Samuel Arden, Seattle's top attorney. Samuel placed a thick file on the table and said, "Edward, we're done." I looked up. He spoke each word like a judge slamming a gavel. Daniel Turner has committed multiple federal felonies. I breathed slowly. No joy, no sorrow, just truth. Samuel handed me the final page. We're issuing charges. I stared at the sentence and understood. The battle I feared stepping into was no longer a battle. It was an inevitability. A storm Daniel created and now had to walk into. One by one, everyone left the room. I remained. No anger, no bitterness, no tears. Only a hollow calm like an empty house after everything has been taken. I whispered softly to myself, to Margaret, to the life I once lived. If this is the only way to restore the truth, I accept it. A breath, a vow. In that moment, I stopped being a victim and became a man reclaiming justice. And Daniel would now face the life he built with his own lies. There are days you walk into a courtroom not to win, but to finally put an end to a wound that has bled for far too long. April 4th, 2025 was that day for me. I didn't shake. I didn't fear. I didn't hope Daniel would apologize. I only wanted the truth to stand where it belonged. Pierce County Superior Court was packed as if it were a Friday night movie premiere. Reporters, Tacoma residents, people who had followed the viral video, HOA grandmothers. Even the volunteers who had repaired my roof came. Daniel sat at the defense table. Wrinkled suit, dark circles under his eyes, patchy stubble. I couldn't recognize the young man who once stood next to me at his college graduation. Miley sat beside him, but she didn't hold his hand. She didn't look at him. The distance between them was colder than the Seattle wind in January. Judge Brown, silver hair, sharp eyes, struck the gavel. Let's begin. The recording. Daniel exposed by his own voice. Tom stood plugged a USB into the court's system. Daniel's voice echoed across the courtroom speakers. No, no. The Y is wrong. Dad writes it slower. Let me try again. Then the scratch of a pen. Daniel breathing hard. Edward Hay. Hey, damn it. The courtroom erupted, gasps, murmurs, hands over mouths. Judge Brown slammed the gavel. Order. Daniel's face lost all color. Miley froze. I looked at Daniel. He couldn't look at me. Witness 2. Alex Cooper. The employee. Daniel tried to threaten a young man, stood nervous, wringing his hands but with a fire in his eyes. My name is Alex Cooper. I work at Blue Fern Bistro. He swallowed hard. Mr. Turner forced us to sign documents he said were for kitchen equipment upgrades. But when I asked questions, he told me I wasn't allowed to read anything. Samuel asked, "Did Mr. Turner threaten you?" Alex nodded. He said if I didn't sign, he'd cut my hours. A soft murmur rippled across the room. Daniel lowered his head even further. Witness 3. Harold Livingston, the Santa Claus from Christmas dinner. Then Samuel spoke. The court calls. Mr. Harold Livingston. A man in his 70s stood white beard, red sweater, tall frame. He walked to the stand with a cane. He looked exactly like Santa Claus. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, I was Santa at the Christmas dinner in Daniel Turner's home. Gasps. He continued. I heard Daniel say homeless suits him anyway, and I felt sick. A son should never speak to his father like that. He turned toward me, eyes wet. Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you that night. I nodded. My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Evidence 48. The text messages that broke Miley. Samuel lifted a stack of papers. Exhibit 48. Text messages from Heather Miley's best friend sent to investigators. Once the house is sold, we'll finally be free. Daniel won't have to worry about his debts. He said Edward doesn't need that house anyway. The courtroom froze. Miley turned to Daniel, her face cracking open. Daniel, you said you were doing all this? For us. Her voice shattered. Daniel didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Miley stood, hands trembling, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Your Honor, I didn't know Daniel was gambling. I didn't know he used the house money to pay off debts. I didn't know Mexico was his escape plan. She spun toward him. You lied to me. To save your addiction. Your debts. Your life. Daniel stared down at the table, like a mountain collapsing in slow motion. Judge Brown surveyed the courtroom. You could hear breathing. You could hear hearts beating. He spoke. The home valued at $135 million is to be returned to Mr. Edward Hayes. Unity Holdings LLC is to be frozen indefinitely, and Daniel Turner is charged with forgery, identity theft, elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, tax evasion, escrow fraud, attempted flight to avoid prosecution. Miley's shoulders dropped. Daniel sagged in his chair. Judge Brown continued. Daniel, Turner is ordered to vacate the property within 48 hours. The courtroom exploded, gasps, whispering shock. But I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. It was simply time. June 6, 2025. Karma comes full circle. Tacoma police arrived at the Maplewood house. I stood on the lawn, not inside, not even on the porch. The door opened. 2 officers led Daniel out, handcuffed, head down, like a boy caught stealing from a corner store. He glanced at me, eyes full of fear, regret, and a plea he didn't dare speak. The wind gusted. Leaves scraped across the pavement. I took 1 step forward, looked Daniel in the eyes, and said with the same words he once used to break me, You don't live here anymore. A few neighbors gasped. 1 officer hesitated. Daniel bit his lip, a wound deeper than any prison sentence. They placed him in the car. The door shut. The engine rumbled. And I stood there before the home that had finally returned to me. I was no longer the father thrown out on Christmas Eve. No longer the homeless old man at his son's table. I was a survivor, a victor, a husband keeping a promise. And Daniel finally tasted the exact words he once stabbed me with. There are mornings that pass as gently as a breath, and there are mornings that weigh as heavily as memory. The morning of November 12, 2025 was the second kind. Tacoma carried that pale golden light only late autumn can make, thin, fragile, almost glass-like. As it slid across my porch and settled on the rebuilt flower trellis my neighbors helped me fix earlier this year, I stood on the front porch, hands wrapped around a mug of hot coffee. Steam curled up into the crisp air, mixing with the scent of new pine, a scent I hadn't smelled since Margaret passed. A cool breeze brushed past my cheek. So soft, I could almost hear her laugh beside me. "Ed, it's cold. Put a jacket on." Funny how life takes you in a wide, painful circle, only to bring you back exactly where you belonged. I had come home, to the house of 40 years, the house that had been sold behind my back, and rebuilt brick by neighbors who refused to let injustice win. When I opened the door to pick up the morning paper, I saw it. A cream-colored envelope placed neatly on the porch. No return address, no postage. Only 2 words written messily across the front for Dad. My heart tightened. I had held court documents thicker than phone books without flinching, but this thin envelope made my hands tremble. I took it inside, sat on the wooden chair the HOA repaired for me last January, and slowly opened the letter. The first line stole my breath for 3 full seconds. "Dad, I called you homeless, but I'm the one with no home." I read the words slowly as if Daniel were saying them himself. Not the man who mocked me at Christmas dinner, but the little boy who once ran barefoot across the yard every time Margaret baked cookies. The letter continued. "Miley left me. She said she married a man, not a gamble. I'm in counseling now, court ordered, and maybe needed. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking for a chance to start again someday. No excuses, no blaming, no manipulation, just a son who had lost everything and finally realized where he'd gone wrong." I set the letter on my lap and stared out the window. In the backyard, the maple tree was shedding its last red leaves. The same tree Margaret, Daniel, and I planted in 1986. Daniel so small I had to carry him on my shoulders so he could help pat the soil. I remember he asked me, "Dad, does this tree grow because we love it?" I had laughed, ruffled his hair. "Yes, son, and you grow the same way. Strange, isn't it? A child can grow up on love and still lose the very thing that raised him, not because he is evil, but because he is weak. And sometimes, weakness destroys a family more violently than cruelty ever could." I stood and walked to the wooden shelf where Margaret's wedding photo sat. This frame had been tossed into the trash when Daniel cleared the house, but my neighbors found it and returned it to me. I placed Daniel's letter beside it. Morning light caught the edge of the glass, casting a soft halo on the wall, and when the breeze slipped through the door frame, the curtains swayed gently, just like it did on the last morning Margaret was alive. I heard her voice in my memory, "Ed, if Daniel ever loses his way, be the first one to pull him back, not the first to push him away." I closed my eyes. "Mag, I'm trying. I don't know if I'll ever forgive Daniel completely. Forgiveness is a journey, not a single moment. But I do know this justice was done. The truth came into the light, and a heart, even one with cracks, can still beat again. Justice isn't revenge. Sometimes it's a heart willing to admit it was wrong, and a father willing to listen at the right time. And now I want to ask you, if it were you, could you forgive a child who sold your home to pay his wife's debts? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to hear your heart. And if this story touched you, made you think of your own family, or reminded you that justice does still exist, please like, share, and subscribe. This story isn't really an ending, because it's never the end, as long as we still dare to love again.